one of the most important foundational documents in American history, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, is almost completely unknown by most people today. It's almost completely ignored by the government-run schools. But I've got you covered today. Following the principles outlined by Thomas Jefferson in 1784, it had included a precursor to the Bill of Rights 4 years before one was added to the Constitution for the United States. It banned slavery in the territories, decades before the same language right from the pen of Thomas Jefferson was copied into the 13th Amendment, and they did it intentionally, copying from Jefferson. And it also led to the creation of a number of states: Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. On this episode, I'll go through the highlights. But first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for July 12th, 2024. And let's kick this off with Proclamation 5676 on Northwest Ordinance Bicentennial Day 1987. This is from President Ronald Reagan. He writes, "On July 13th, we celebrate the bicentennial of the Northwest Ordinance, considered one of the foundation documents of our nation because it became a model for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and because of its significance for the expansion of the Union." Again, it was passed on July 13, 1787, under the Articles of Confederation. This was passed by the Confederation Congress while the framers were meeting in the Philadelphia Convention during the summer of 1787. So some people want you to believe that they couldn't get anything accomplished under the Articles, and that is definitely not the truth, because this was a big one. Officially titled An Ordinance for the Government of the Territory of the United States, northwest of the River Ohio, Mike Meharry points out that it applied to land ceded by the British in the Treaty of Paris, which was the official end of the American Revolution, the War for Independence. I've got a map of the area of the Northwest Territory up on the screen here with the boundaries of the modern states. And Mike points out that it chartered a government for territories north of the Ohio River, and it outlined a three-stage method to admit new states into the Union. And it eventually led to the formation of those various states that I mentioned before: Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. It also covered part of what is now Minnesota. But maybe the most significant part is the fact that it banned slavery in the new territories, and the language was carried over to the 13th Amendment decades later. Mike points out that the ordinance evolved from a proposal primarily penned by Thomas Jefferson in 1784 that would have originally applied to southern territories as well as northern ones. And here, his report in March of 1784, in Jefferson's original draft, he proposed this language banning slavery in the territories, both north and south. He really wanted a broad ban in the territories. It says, "After the year 1800 of the Christian era, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in any of the said states, otherwise than in punishment of crimes whereof the party shall have been duly convicted to have been personally guilty." Now, it was narrowly defeated in 1784, so Jefferson tried to get that in there. And 2 years later, he commented about this defeat, noting that, as Mike puts it, of the 10 states present, 6 voted for it unanimously, 3 opposed it, and 1 delegation was split. So Jefferson put it this way: this is a close vote, 7 votes being requisite to decide the proposition affirmatively. It was lost. And he really bemoaned that loss in June of 1786, but was still positive in pushing forward. He said, "The voice of a single individual of the state which was divided, or of one of those which were of the negative, would have prevented this abominable crime from spreading itself over the new country." It was a real close call in 1784. And Jefferson said, "Thus we see the fate of millions unborn hanging on the tongue of one man, and heaven was silent in that awful moment." I don't think, and I've read through this a few times because I did an episode on this as well. I don't know if he pointed out who that one man was, but I would love to know. Maybe someone else is actually better at that history than me. Anyways, Jefferson continued. He said, "But it is hoped it will not always be silent, and that the friends to the rights of human nature will in the end prevail. because on the 16th of March, 1785, this is in June of 1786, it was moved in Congress that the same proposition should be referred to a committee, and it was by the votes of 8 states for and 3 against. So they were willing to consider it again. And so that slavery ban that Jefferson wrote, even though he wasn't there in 1787, it was included in the final text of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This is Article 6. There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory, otherwise than in the punishment of crimes whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. And even if today is the very first time you ever heard of the Northwest Ordinance, that text still might sound kind of familiar. We may have heard something like that. It was copied almost verbatim, and it was intentional. They knew it was from Jefferson, and that's part of why they wanted it. They copied it into the 13th Amendment. Here's Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, these United States. And historian, constitutional scholar Kurt Lash, who I've mentioned on the show a number of times over the years, he pointed out the committee intentionally based its draft on Jefferson's language in the Northwest Ordinance. And Meharry sums it up like this. Even some who wanted broader language in the 13th Amendment acknowledged they were basing it on Jefferson's text, and they thought it was awesome. For instance, I'm adding that, awesome. For instance, Senator Charles Sumner said he appreciated that the proposed draft was based on, quote, the old Jeffersonian ordinance, sacred in our history. So it might be a weird irony to some people today, but Thomas Jefferson actually wrote the text of Section 1 of the 13th Amendment banning slavery. Anyways, here from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution, they also point out that it was really a precursor to the Bill of Rights. They said the ordinance contained an abbreviated Bill of Rights. Some people refer to it specifically as a Bill of Rights or kind of a precursor or a pseudo Bill of Rights, but it lists a bunch of natural rights that should not be violated, which is, again, a precursor to what they put in the Constitution a few years later. It consisted of 6 articles that formed a compact between the original states and the people and states in the said territory. Mike says this early precursor to the Bill of Rights included several protections within the legal process. It established the writ of habeas corpus and guaranteed trial by jury. It said no man shall be deprived of his liberty or property, but by the judgment of his peers or the law of the land. Mike points out there was also a clause prohibiting cruel or unusual punishments, like a precursor to the 8th Amendment, and guaranteeing that all persons shall be bailable unless for capital offenses, where the proof shall be evident or the presumption great. And in Article 2, it actually included express protections of property rights, prohibiting any law that would in any matter whatever interfere with or affect private contracts or engagements. Article 1 expressly included protections for religious liberty. No person demeaning himself in a peaceable and orderly manner shall ever be molested on account of his mode of worship or religious sentiments in the said territory. Meharry points out that the ordinance described religion, morality, and knowledge as, quote, being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. And because of that, quote, schools and the means of education shall ever be encouraged. Now, it didn't say that the government should run it or control it or dictate what schools or education are going to be all about or be involved in it in any way, but that education should be encouraged. Now, the ordinance also included a provision meant to respect and protect the rights of Native Americans. And this is in Article 3. It said, the utmost good faith shall always be observed towards the Indians. Their lands and property shall never be taken from them without their consent. And in their property, rights, and liberty, they shall never be invaded or disturbed unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress. Now, unfortunately, things did not play out as well as it sounds on paper. But certainly in his first term, President George Washington worked to put this type of policy into practice. He actually made an effort on it. Under his administration, treaties were established with 7 northern tribes: the Shawnee, Miami, Ottawa, Chippewa, Iroquois, Sauk, and Fox. So they actually had official treaties with 7 northern tribes. Now, on the other hand, as noted by Mount Vernon, which is George Washington's estate, the influx of new settlers in the area, coupled with a lack of meaningful protection of tribal land, led to conflicts in the late 18th century. That might be something to cover in another episode. I certainly did on covering George Washington's approach to war powers, but I'd like to dig into that a little further. Now, in recent years, a number of Supreme Court justices have actually cited the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 as an originalist source, even though it was adopted before the Constitution was even considered in the ratification debates. Now, these are people like Samuel Alito, Sandra Day O'Connor is cited, Anthony Kennedy, Clarence Thomas, probably a few others. Mike Meharry goes through some of the highlights in his article. Of course, again, that'll be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I do encourage you to read that in full. It's got a ton of awesome information. Now, unfortunately, at best, rather than encouraging education today, government pretty much controls it. So we don't learn much of anything, if anything at all, about the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. We got to go out there and look for that information on our own. It had a precursor to the Bill of Rights and the Jeffersonian model to prohibit slavery. But like we do here at the TAC every single day of the year, we're working really hard to get this essential foundational history out to more and more people. And nothing helps us get this work done more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options, and I'd be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us as a member today. We really need your support and your help to be able to continue expanding and growing and setting a foundation for the Constitution and liberty. You can also make a one-time donation over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something. That's more important than anything. I hope it made you think as well. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.